Hello, everyone, and welcome to Navigating the Clerkship Process for Students of Color and First-Generation Law Students. My name is Thea Cohen. I'm the Director of Strategic Engagement here at the American Constitution Society, which is the nation's leading network of progressive lawyers. I want to thank our distinguished judges and our moderator for sharing their wisdom with you today. And before I turn it over to them, I wanted to briefly touch on what ACS has to offer its members who are interested in clerking. Part of ACS's mission is building up the next generation of progressive and public interest attorneys through programming, networking, and career development. Because a clerkship is a near prerequisite to becoming a judge, we see the Clerkship Assistance Program as an extension of our Path to the Bench project. The judges confirmed in 15 to 20 years are going to largely be drawn from the pool of law clerks today. So we place special emphasis on helping talented and progressive students with diverse backgrounds and experiences find clerkships. In addition to public programs like this one, we can help individual members navigate the sometimes opaque and highly competitive process. Each year, we match students and new graduates with former clerks in the ACS network as part of our mentor matching program. We also select a group of approximately 40 clerkship candidates as part of our clerkship assistance cohort. This group of future progressive legal leaders will receive special help with their clerkship application, which can include counseling sessions, help with their list of judges, review of application materials, connections with many former clerks and others who know the judge, and direct recommendations sometimes where it would be appropriate. And the goal of the cohort is to give the connections, knowledge, and support to students who may have not had all of these advantages when they entered law school. We are also looking for candidates who are going to remain part of the ACS network and share their knowledge and experience as mentors to the generation of lawyers that follows them. The application for both programs is open to all ACS members and will close on February 21st. I'm going to put a link into the chat at the end of the program. I don't want to take up any more of our time, so I will turn things over to our moderator, Julia Saladino. Thank you so much, Julia.
Thank you, Thea. Welcome, everyone, to today's panel. My name is Julia Saladino, and I'm a career counselor at Georgetown Law, and I have the privilege of moderating today's panel. I'm going to introduce our panelists in just a moment, but I want to let you know that we will be taking questions at the end of the panel. Feel free to put any questions in the Q&A box throughout the program, and we'll get to as many of them as we can. So I will go ahead and let everyone know who's joining us today for our panel. We have Judge Nancy Abudu, who is the judge on the United States Court of Appeals in the 11th Circuit. Justice Anne McKeig, who is on the Minnesota Supreme Court. Judge Latrice Westbrooks from the Mississippi Court of Appeals. And Judge Jamal Whitehead, who's on the United States District Court for the Western District of Washington. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Before I dive into questions about the ins and outs of the clerkship process, I would actually love to hear a little bit about y'all's career path. So if you could share a little bit about your legal background and some of the highlights of your career that you feel led you to the bench, I think that'd be a great place for us to start. Would it be okay to start with Judge Abudu?
Sure. Thank you so much for this invitation and the opportunity to be a part of this esteemed panel. It's been a great opportunity to get to know my fellow judicial colleagues. And I will say that in terms of my path to the bench, I really was a public interest lawyer. My resume is online, so I worked for the American Civil Liberties Union, both the national office as well as the Florida affiliate. I spent some time with the Southern Poverty Law Center. My career, even though I did spend a short period of time with the law firm, has primarily been in the area of public interest. A lot of my work has concentrated in the South. And so I think that that's been very beneficial, even though it's a different position being behind the bench instead of in front of the bench. I do believe that my litigation experience has been helpful in terms of just digesting the issues, understanding both sides. And I do feel that that experience has made me better positioned to do this job.
Thank you so much. Justice McKeig, would you mind going next?
Sure, and I apologize to everybody. We were having technical difficulties and my camera was not functioning, so I apologize. I'm on the Minnesota Supreme Court. I've been on the court since 2016. I was the first Native American female in all of the United States to be on a state's highest court, so that's been an honor. But my path is a little bit unusual. I grew up in a small town on the reservation. My population was 106, and so just leaving there and going to college was already a significant feat. But I was able to do that, make my way through law school, and then I landed a job in the largest public law firm in the Twin Cities, which was the Hennepin County Attorney's Office, and I did child protection work for 16 years. And during the course of that, the first Native American district court judge was sworn in the Twin Cities, and I actually was able to go and watch that happen. And it was the first time that I had ever thought maybe I could actually be a judge. And then I had the honor of appearing before him, and he took me under his wing, and I was his mentee, despite the fact that I didn't think I needed one. I was 25 and thought I knew everything, so I didn't think I really needed one. And so he really helped, I think, develop me and just help me sharpen my abilities in court, but also smooth out the rough edges. And I'm really grateful to him, and I think that speaks to mentorship and what that can do. And then when it was closer to 2008, he said he thought it was time that I try to get on the district court bench, which I did. And so then I was a trial judge for almost 9 years by the time there was the opening on the Supreme Court. So it's a little bit of an unusual path. I was not a Rhodes Scholar by any means, but I'm happy to be where I am and grateful for the mentorship of Judge Blazer.
Thank you so much. That's so inspiring. Judge Westbrook, would you go next, please?
Good afternoon, everyone. And again, thank you for this opportunity to present on this panel. I believe I presented last year, and it was a wonderful experience for me, and I'm happy to be invited back again this year. A little bit about my background. After graduating in 1997, I moved to Mississippi, and after clerking for a very brief period of time, I interviewed with the district attorney's office down on the Gulf Coast, Biloxi, Gulfport, Harrison County, here in Mississippi, and he wanted to hire me. And I accepted the job as a prosecutor. And not long after being in that job, I just didn't think that I was suited for being a prosecutor. And yes, it's needed, it's much needed work, especially for African Americans, but it just didn't suit me. So after 3 years, I left that position and went into private practice with Bird & Associates here in Jackson, Mississippi. And after that, I decided to go out on my own. And because I had cut my teeth as a prosecutor and had done criminal work, I decided to become a criminal defense attorney and found my niche. I was a public defender for Holmes County, Mississippi, which is about an hour north of Jackson, Mississippi, for about 9 years. And when you're a public defender in Mississippi, that allows you to do different things if you're not a full-time public defender, state public defender. And so I did that, but I also was able to maintain a private practice. And so during my private practice, I was able to handle other matters, civil matters, as well as other criminal matters. And so I also was able to handle school to prison pipeline cases. And one of the first in Mississippi, I was able to argue before the Mississippi Court of Appeals and actually got a case reversed, allowing a child to not go into the perils of going into the system that way, only for the Mississippi Supreme Court to come back and reverse that case. Basically what I believe and still believe even 20 years later, based on based for political reasons. And that was when I started to really think about possibly and passively joining the bench, not quite joining the Court of Appeals at that time, but I really saw how being on the bench could, really make a difference in a case. And afterwards, I also, as a criminal defense attorney, I handled another case, a case that I handled pro bono, which I also did, probably more often than I should have. An older attorney once told me, you got to eat. And so, but sometimes when you want to do the right thing and you need to do the right thing, sometimes you have to worry about food later. Just food for thought. But I handled this case for a young woman who had been wrongfully accused of murdering her 11-month-old son, and she was going to be prosecuted by the state. They were vigorously prosecuting her, only for us to find out after I got the assistance of an expert through requesting that from the court. We found out that the child actually passed away from myocarditis. So he had that and he had pneumonia. So she was able to avoid a life sentence, and she was able to be reunited with her other children. And she is, enjoying her life today. And so when you talk about highlights, when you talk about backgrounds and highlights, that's actually one of the cases that was a highlight for me, because I felt like I did what we're put here to do as lawyers, and that is to protect someone's rights and make sure that they are not swallowed up by a system that we see so many people, fall prey to. And my path to the bench, that helped. Back in 2012, a friend called me and said, listen, I want you to come over. I want to talk about your future. And, this is a light moment, but I actually thought he was about to introduce me to my fiance. And that, of course, was not. He wanted to talk about my political future, which I would say, you always think that maybe it should be somebody else. When you're tapping the shoulder and you think about it and you pray about it, that perhaps, this is your calling. I was elected in 2016. I would never be appointed by a Republican governor. And that's fine with me. The people elected me in 2016. I just entered an 8-year term, and I've just started my new term, my next 8 years, about 3 weeks ago. And I'm grateful to have the opportunity to serve in this capacity. So, thank you.
Thank you. And we have a question in the chat about when people realized that they wanted to join the bench. Could you speak to how many years into your career you were at when you kind of made that decision?
Thank you for asking that question. That's a very good question. I had been approached. Of course, Mississippi is divided into districts, and there's actually a case that is pending now in the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Mississippi, challenging the Supreme Court districts. And so the Court of Appeals districts are divided into 5 districts. And so I say that to say that residency is important. It's very important when you think about not only running, but where you are when you are thinking about running. And it was probably 2010 when I started really seriously thinking about running. And at the time I wasn't ready. And so I just kind of just said, this is just not my time. And plus what I was approached for was chancery court, and that's dealing with a lot of child support matters, divorce, just a lot of things that I really knew that I did not want to even, deal with at the time. Ironically enough, I'm on the Court of Appeals, and that's exactly a lot of what I see. But so it was about 2010 when I started seriously thinking about this may be my future. This is something I really seriously need to think about. And so when when I was tapped on the shoulder to think about running for the Court of Appeals, it was no small feat. It's 24 counties. And half of probably about a third of Mississippi itself. And so it was no small thing to think about actually campaigning for this seat. And it was a huge endeavor for my first real run at a judicial seat. And I would say that when you're thinking about running, think about why it is that you want to run, first of all. Being a judicial officer may not be your calling. If you are thinking about the executive branch, if you're thinking about the legislative branch, think about what it is that you really want to do before you put your name on that ballot or before you submit it for nomination. And then, go for it and lay the groundwork for that. But yes, I would say if I had to really pinpoint it, I would say it was probably 2010 when I was seriously approached about running for a judicial seat.
Thank you so much.
I hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Judge Whitehead, could you go ahead and tell us a little bit about your background?
Sure. Thank you so much to ACS for having me here. You can count on me anytime when it comes to talking to law students about pathways to the clerkship or pathways to the bench. Um, I took the oath of office in April of 2023, so I'm coming up now on 2 years on the bench, and anniversaries always give you a time to sort of reflect on where you've been and perhaps where you're going. And reflecting on where I've been, I still marvel that I'm in this position, that I've got this office. I come into the courthouse. I mean, I still pinch myself about this role. I went to first off, I'm on the U.S. District Court here in the Western District of Washington, which means I'm seated in Seattle. I'm a local kid. I went to high school in the area. I went to college at University of Washington, law school at Seattle University School of Law. I knew I wanted to help people. I mean, that's what I went to law school for. I just didn't know how I would do that. I sort of got swept up in the inertia of just go to a law firm and try to make partners. So that's what I did. My first move out of law school was working at a commercial litigator at a regional firm here in Seattle. It was great experience, great training, great connections. All in all, it was a wonderful experience. But it was nowhere near what I went to law school to do. I mean, some of the disputes that I was handling, I just, what am I doing with my life? Was the thought that flashed across my brain. So there was an opportunity at the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission here in Seattle. The Seattle field office was looking for an attorney. So after about 3 years in private practice in commercial litigation, I applied for the role at the EEOC. I was fortunate and blessed and got the job. And I feel like that's really where I came into my own as an attorney, was working for the EEOC. We were handling employment discrimination cases of all kinds in the Northwest. It was really sort of a regional position. We did a lot of work in Eastern Washington with agro businesses, farm worker sex abuse cases in particular. So it was a real formative experience for me. I was thrust into a leadership position on those cases, and really had the ball in my hand, so to speak, with working with the charging parties, opposing counsel, the judges, writing briefs, responding to discoveries. I mean, you name it. I aged in dog years in that role, while my colleagues back in private practice were just getting to the point where maybe someone would let them take a deposition at year 5. I mean, I'd been there, done that, and was trying cases. So it was a great experience, lifelong friends and mentors that I made in that job. But someone put a bug in my ear about going to the U.S. Attorney's Office. The U.S. Attorney's Office here in Seattle was looking for a civil rights attorney. They already had someone in that role. But I thought to myself, gosh, I mean, I want to help people. I love the employment cases, but I really want to broaden the opportunities and what it means to help and what it means to serve. So the role was really appealing to me. I applied for the job and I got that job. Unfortunately, it wasn't quite what I thought it would be. Certainly no shade to the office. I mean, again, great colleagues. I mean, it's something else to be able to stand up in court and say you represent the United States. But, in terms of the subject area and what I wanted to do, I mean, it was primarily, actually exclusively, a defensive posture. So after a couple years as an AUSA, I went back to private practice, but this side as a plaintiff side trial attorney. And I handled employment cases, and tort matters is what I did primarily. Employment discrimination of all types. I tried a case about a man with a voice prosthetic. He had been fired from a car dealership because he spoke with this prosthetic. We won that case. It was appealed to the Ninth Circuit, argued it, and it was affirmed on appeal. So that was a great case, a really interesting case. One of my other cases was just affirmed by the Ninth Circuit last week. It was a wage and hour class action case. We represented detained persons at the Northwest Detention Center. So these are people that were being held in detention while their immigration status was being sorted out. Importantly, it is not a carceral setting. They are not being punished. It is an administrative detention. So while they were there, the private company that ran the detention facility used them for labor. So it was the detainees were cooking, cleaning, even cutting hair. I mean, you name it. They were doing all the work. And the wage they received from the company was $1 a day. So my colleagues and I, and frankly, a coalition said, you know what, that violates Washington labor laws. They should be paid the minimum wage. They're employees. So it was a hard fought case. We won at the trial level. It was an $18 million verdict. And just last week, after a lot of procedural back and forth, the Ninth Circuit affirmed the verdict. So that's my background. What brought me to the bench? While I was an AUSA, there's a judge here, Judge Richard Jones. He's the third African-American judge here in the history of the third judge, African-American background here in the state of Washington. But he was a mentor of mine while I was in law school. While I was an AUSA, I got a call from his legal assistant, Juanita. Juanita said, "Judge wants to talk to you." I said, "Okay, I'll be there. I'm on my way." So I came to Chambers, and he said, "Hey, I mean, you've been doing great work. I've known you since you were a law student. I really think you have the kind of profile to take my job. You've been in the federal courts. The judges know you." He said, "I want you to," his plan, he said, "do civil for 3-4 years. Then I want you to transfer over to criminal as an AUSA, do that for 3-4 years." He said, "And then you take my job." That's what he said to me. So I said, "Thanks, Judge. I really appreciate that you can see me in that way, but I love being an advocate. I like fighting for people. I like fighting for things. I like fighting for causes." So, the idea of being this neutral, really, it didn't appeal to me until, later on, when vacancies opened up here on the bench. In particular, Judge Jones, my mentor, the man that I just spoke about, his seat became vacant. So I thought about it, prayed about it, talked to Judge Jones about it, and I put my name in the ring for the position and was ultimately the successful candidate. But where I'm at now, although I'm no longer an advocate for any particular cause or any particular party, we're advocates for justice. We're advocates for a fair and open process and system. And that is truly a heady role to be in, as someone that's safeguarding the system and making sure that everyone, regardless of their background, regardless of their position, has their day in court and can be heard and can receive justice. So in that way, I feel like I'm the ultimate advocate, and I've loved every minute of it.
Thank you so much. It's so wonderful to hear about everyone's path and that it's really service that brought all of you to the bench. So I really appreciate that perspective. So let's talk a little bit about clerkships. A lot of times students come to me and they're like, "I know I want a clerkship, or I'm supposed to want a clerkship," but they don't really know exactly what goes on in chambers. So can you briefly explain what a clerkship looks like in your chambers and what are the qualities that really make a clerk successful in your chambers? Would it be okay to start with Justice McKeig?
Thank you. Yeah, I think it really depends. So I would say in the district court, it was very different than at the Supreme Court. I always describe the district court or the trial court work as sort of, if you like, emergency room and a little bit of drama and seeing lawyering at all different levels and really seeing the whole nuts and bolts of how the trial system works. Then you want a trial court level clerkship, which is something that I would have wanted and have if I had ever had the opportunity. And I think when you get to the appellate courts, specifically the Supreme Court for Minnesota, it changes a little bit. I would say it's a different kind of individual somebody who is extremely independent, but creative, who is curious, intellectually curious, and really likes reading and writing a lot. And that would not have been a clerkship that I would have sought out because because of my personality. So I think it's a little bit about knowing yourself. And I think it's always good to reach out if you think that's something that you might be interested in. We started a program here in Minnesota where one of the law schools, we take what we call residents. We sort of copied the medical residency, and we'll have students who come and they'll spend 40 hours a week for a full semester and they'll get their law school credits. But then they will spend that time with us and they will ride along with our clerks, but they'll also do assignments very similar to what our clerks are doing. And it allows people who might not have the grades, let's say, or the writing ability at an earlier stage, and then they can see and they work on it. And then many of those residents have come back and become our full-time clerks in subsequent years. So I think it just really depends on which jurisdiction and which, if you're interested in a trial court or if you're interested in an appellate court. So kind of knowing yourself, as I would say.
Thank you. I think that's great advice, and that sounds like a wonderful program. Judge Westbrooks, would you tell us a little bit about your chambers?
Well, in my chambers, I have 2 law clerks, and I would agree with Justice McKeig that you really do have to know yourself and what it is that you're looking for in a clerkship. Um, trial judges and their clerks, they have more interaction with the public. But when you come to an appellate court, it is more isolating. And so you don't have interaction with the court as much as you would on a trial court level. So you have to adjust to that. And there is a tremendous amount of reading and writing. That helps if you come with a love for that and you're really good at it, obviously. But also, our clerks are starting to change here in Mississippi, and I can't speak to other states, but at one point having a clerkship was a temporary job. You would come in for 1, maybe 2 years, and then you would rotate out. Well, now we're starting to see a lot of lawyers wanting to come back to have these jobs permanently. And because of the rotation and because of what it takes to train law clerks, some judges are opting to have permanent clerks. I myself have clerks who come in for maybe a 2-year rotation, but instead of having a permanent clerk. And that's because I think that we should have clerks to come in and have that experience and have that available to a number of law students who would like to get that type of experience. But again, it is a lot of reading, it is a lot of writing. And I will also say that you here on the Court of Appeals, I know that some states, they operate in panels, number one. The Mississippi Court of Appeals is an en banc court. So all of the judges weigh in on every opinion, every decision, every time. And also we hear cases, most of the cases that come in from the trial court around the state, from the trial courts around the state, excuse me. So we will hear criminal matters, most criminal matters, except for death penalty cases where the death sentence is actually, the person has been actually sentenced to death. But everything else we hear under the umbrella of criminal law. And we also hear most civil cases except for annexations, election contests, cases of first impression, sometimes, and even then we get some of those cases. And we also don't hear anything that's dealing with huge public interest or public utilities. Now, why do I say that? Because everything else we hear, from divorce cases, personal injury cases, land dispute cases, we get it, and we get it first. Our court last year just heard about maybe just over 400 cases in total. And so that's a lot of work, and that's just opinions, majority opinions that were handed down. That does not include the orders and the motions that we read and that we hear. And so we do a lot of work here on the court. So why am I saying that? Because that affords our law clerks to delve in a different number of cases that they may be interested in. So much so that I learned what my clerks would like to possibly do or practice later on. And if that case comes into my chambers, I'll likely assign it to that particular clerk. But if not, then they get a chance to learn about different types of law issues and how to deal with those issues. So when they are ready to practice, or if that's what they choose to do, then they'll be well equipped.
Thank you so much. Judge Abudu, would you mind going next?
Sure. Well, wow, first to Judge Westbrooks, that's a lot to juggle. I do appreciate that. And like Judge Whitehead, I will be celebrating my 2nd year on the bench, but I still very much feel the newness of it. So I have decided that I focus on what it is I believe my chambers needs each year, and that's how I've been hiring my law clerks. They serve for 1-year terms and really handle all of the cases that go to oral argument in terms of preparing me for oral argument and then assisting me with the actual writing of drafts for which I'm the writing judge, and carefully reviewing and offering edits to the opinions that my colleagues have circulated. And sometimes, helping me analyze whether or not a concurrence or a dissent is in order based on the case. All of that is a lot of work. And so I would also, again, just echo Judge Westbrooks in that it's a lot of work and you need to be prepared to do that. I think that you know, for some, especially who've been in practice and then they come to the bench, might view it as a break from the practice and then come and find out that it's not. In fact, in some ways, you're doing more work because now you're spending time learning areas of the law with which you're not familiar, as opposed to your regular day job, which is not just rote, but at the same time, that familiarization allows for efficiency. I will also say that because I'm still developing the foundation for my chambers, the clerks that have been the most successful are those who recognize that. So they don't come in expecting everything in a manual. They're actually helping me develop a manual that their successors will benefit from. So it's also recognition of a sacrifice that they're making for the future generations of law clerks who work for me. And they also are helping me understand the policies and practices, not only of the court, but those that I decide that I want to adopt or that I want to reject because they don't work for me. And so I think that right now, and I envision in the future, but definitely these first couple of years, my law clerks are critical to making sure that I have the foundation to do this work for the long term.
Thank you so much for that detailed answer. Judge Whitehead, would you mind telling us about your chambers?
Sure. The finger snaps to Judge Abudu there for constructing the ship still. I mean, I'm very much in that phase. Yeah, I love it when people ask me, Judge, what's your practice for X? I say, I don't have a practice. I've never encountered this issue before, you know. So that's still a near daily occurrence for me. In terms of chambers, I have 3 clerks. I have 1 career law clerk. I have another clerk that has done a prior district court clerkship. And then my 3rd clerk is straight out of law school. And I think I like that mix just in terms of just the different abilities and attributes that it brings to chambers. You know, someone with a steady hand and someone that perhaps is looking to with something with a new approach or new angle. And frankly, some of the doctrines that I approach right now or encounter now, people that are in law school or closer to law school, you know, have a better memory of, you know, first year of torts or whatever it might be than I do. As far as what I'm looking for, it's more or less the same things that I was looking for as a partner hiring associates at a law firm. I'm looking for intellect. I'm looking for a team player. I'm looking for someone with some grit. And to unpack each of those, I mean, intellect, you know, obviously aptitude, you've got to have the horsepower to do this job. On the federal court level, we read, research, and write a lot. So I need smart people, and you know, your grades show that. I don't have any sort of bright line cutoffs in that respect, but you know, you've got to have the aptitude and the curiosity. You know, I would love to tell you that the parties always give you a good brief, but they don't. Sometimes they lead you down the wrong path. So being able to pull at the thread and figure out, you know, what the controlling law is, or that there's nuance in the law, or that the law is in flux on an issue, is something that, you know, you've just got to be able to pull at, to read those cases and pull at the thread until you figure out what's going on. A team player. I mean, you know, I said I've got 3 clerks as well as a courtroom deputy. So, you know, I want someone that's good to be around, good to have on the team. And that can be demonstrated in so many different ways. But I am looking for team players. I've always liked a really flat organization. I hate hierarchy. I understand that in this job, obviously, you know, my role is different. I tell my clerks, my role is that of decider. Outside of that, I view everything else as really flat. I want my clerks to be able to tell me, you know, Judge, you're getting it wrong, or I think we need to go this way. I need my clerks to tell me. We need to figure it out in chambers because I don't want the circuit to tell me. So let's get it right in chambers. And then finally, grit. This job is hard. It's stressful. I don't want to kid you, especially in these times. So I need someone that has, you know, that inner strength, that inner perseverance, that they can pull through in tough times and sort of have that inner confidence that yes, they can do this. Yes, they will prevail. And they know that because they've done it before. And that can show itself in so many different ways. I saw one of the chats questions about an impactful response that I received to a question, but it was something about grit. I won't tell you my exact questions, but it sort of centers along those 3 issues. But the response was about challenges this woman faced in law school. And now, mind you, she was top 5 in her class, not top 5%, but top 5. I mean, at a really good law school So I'm like, okay, yeah, sure. Law school was hard. Some law school's easy for some people. Was not easy for me. Very hard. Okay. But so I was viewing it skeptically, but the story she told me was just so compelling about how she just was not getting the issues. There was a language barrier. English was her second language, but she talked about just her efforts to double down, and that she just said, I'm not going to lose. Not so much in terms of forget the grades, but I want to understand this material. And she just talked about her approach and talking to her professors and looking at other study aids and talking to students, and just the way she went about canvassing, collecting data, processing it, and just building herself up was just so impressive to me. And of course, it panned out with excellent grades in the end. But that was a great story. I mean, grit can show itself. I mean, someone like me, I was born with half a leg, so I could tell you plenty of stories about grit and determination. So it shows itself in so many different ways. There is no one size fits all, but I mean, that's really what I'm looking for from my law clerks: intellect, team players, and someone that has some demonstrated grit.
Thank you so much. So can we talk a little bit about what you think are the unique benefits or assets that first generation law students and students of color can bring to you as applicants? What have you found to kind of really stand out among these groups of applicants? And we'll go ahead and start with Judge Westbrook, if you don't mind.
What benefits can first generation and African American students bring to the bench? And I'm gonna dovetail off of something that Judge Whitehead mentioned: grit. But I'm going to add to that a love for social justice. And perhaps it's something that maybe I take for granted, having grown up post civil rights era in Memphis, Tennessee, born 4 years after King was assassinated. I grew up in that culture. And it's something that I expect for my law students to have an understanding of, law students and law clerks to have an understanding and a love for social justice. I will not hire anyone who I do not believe has a passion for it. And that's the expectation I believe that first generation lawyers should have, because you are the first in your family to do it. I was a first generation lawyer in my family, and had a passion for wanting to go to law school, wanted to be an attorney, never wanted to do anything else. But I also, because of where I grew up, how I grew up, and having that developed or cultivated in college and then in law school, I also had a love for social justice. And I expect in my practice was driven by that. And I expect for anyone that I hire to also have a passion for social justice. So when you're coming to my chambers and we're looking at issues and we see that someone may have been wrongfully accused, or there is insufficient evidence that to support a conviction, or if someone if summary judgment was granted just because you wanted to avoid a trial or didn't want to go through the expense or time of a trial, and I'm saying that on the part of the trial judge, then I expect for my law clerks to bring that to my attention, and so we can right the wrong. Because everyone, as Judge Whitehead, I believe, mentioned earlier, everyone deserves their day in court, and we want to make sure that no one gets wronged by the system or does not get their day in court, or they have an opportunity to be heard. And so that's what I'm expecting. It's not, and of course, we can always say, and we always say, and it's always true, that you have to be the best at what you're doing. And so, I expect that. Even when you come to the Court of Appeals, I expect that. And so, I want them to understand that. And let me also say this too, that some students that I've hired come from a background where they know someone who has gone through the system. They've been either charged, accused, convicted of a criminal offense. And so they come with that background because they also understand that they don't want that to happen to someone else, or there was something about the system that they did not like. And so I'm expecting when you come to a clerkship, that you come with that history, that background, and hopefully it will fuel you to want to do the right thing always.
Thank you. Judge Abudu, would you mind talking about the benefits you see from this group of students?
Sure. Well, I was thinking about your question. I want to be clear in saying that I don't embrace the proposition that some of us have to be doubly and triply better than others. But the reality is, at least when I was born and growing up and going through this system, that was the understanding. And as a result, that was the standard that I met. And although I don't want to perpetuate that kind of double and triple standard, I do experience sometimes that it makes a difference in terms of the quality of work that people feel comfortable submitting. There are people who haven't been subject to a double and triple standard and yet have made their way to applying to someone like us. And it's not the same. And so I think that however it makes sense to message that, that's kind of what I'm looking for. Someone who understands that the baseline for those who haven't been subject to those extra requirements is not sufficient for someone like me who did. The expectation is different. It is higher because it's where I am. And again, not trying to endorse it, but it's the reality of the situation. I also think that there is something unique about being the first generation. It's when your parents are immigrants, you come out with a different sensibility and you come out at a disadvantage, and that is just true. I mean, in terms of navigating this American system when that was not the system in which your parents grew up, and so their ability sometimes to help you navigate that as much as they want to is just lacking. And so I think someone was talking about the importance of mentors, and that's something that I will underscore, especially for those who are first generation, that, our parents are not always going to be enough, and we have to seek out those who have experience, not only in the area of work we want to do, but in the system that allows you to advance in that particular subject area.
Thank you so much. Judge Whitehead, I'll turn to you.
Yeah, I agree with everything that my colleagues here have said so far. I mean, I think what I would add to it is just the importance of being able to see everything from all angles. One of the things we talk about in chambers here is telling the truth. I've heard it said that trial is a truth-finding mission, a truth-seeking mission. We try to tell the truth with our orders. And I think the only way that we can do that is if we are seeing the issues from all angles. If you're coming in with a bias or predisposition against certain people or certain issues, how can you tell the truth if you're already leaning one way or another? If you're incredulous of a story that someone is telling, well, the cops wouldn't just break that guy's arm for no reason. I mean, of course, I'm going to dismiss this pro se case. That just can't be. So, not having those leanings, or at least being able to guard against them by having all perspectives, is incredibly important to me. That we can take everyone at face value and dig deeper and to really fight against those biases, those leanings.
Thank you. Justice McKeig, I'll turn to you next.
Well, I agree with everything that's been said by my colleagues. The only thing that I would add is, for me, it's sort of a common sense lens, and it is, how does this impact everyday life? In on the Supreme Court, I'm often faced with, they'll say, some pronouncements, and then they used to say, well, we got to think about Joe on the bar stool. And I thought, Joe on the bar stool ain't thinking about this. But how this will impact Joe on the bar stool is X, Y, and Z. And so for me, it's always just the refreshing desire to impact the law, but in a way that is really driven by common sense and true life experience. And I don't think we should never undervalue that.
Thank you so much. So now I want to talk a little bit about the selection process, which is, probably a very stressful part of all of this for students. Can you talk a little bit about how you make your decisions? Do you prioritize anything specific? What can students do to stand out? Do grades matter? Does journal matter? Does work experience matter? So I know they matter to some extent, but can you talk about how you prioritize certain things with your candidate? We will start with Judge Abudu, please.
Well, it's stressful for me too. I will say there are, I mean, and I'm sure listening to this this webinar, so many talented people. I mean, doing amazing things all over the country, some of them internationally. And I start with that because I really hope that when and if you apply for a clerkship, and if you don't get it, it should not be taken personally, because the competition is stiff. And sometimes it's not just about the bare bones of your resume. At least for me, it's about what am I in need of during that clerkship year. So I really want to emphasize that, you know, the law students coming out are doing some amazing work, and success comes in a lot of packages, and a clerkship isn't the only one. And so what I will also do a quick plug is for staff attorneys' offices. I was actually a staff attorney with the 11th Circuit. I did not clerk. And honestly, and this is not to throw shade on the clerkship process, because I now appreciate what it means and the value and, you know, the career launch of being in chambers. But for those who really are just interested in wrestling with constitutional law issues and going through and dealing with as many cases as possible, I would encourage the staff attorney's offices for consideration. In terms of the selection process, as I said, it's really stiff. So I look at what I need that first year, second year. There was a time, and I saw a question in the chat, when I was really focused on people who had clerked at the district court. I thought that meant at least some exposure to being in chambers, some exposure to the cases. And I think that continues to be beneficial. But I also realize that there are sometimes the district court and the appellate court are very different. The tasks are very different. And the district court judges, whom I have a tremendous amount of respect for, are managing a lot. And now I appreciate even more that the role of the appellate court and the advantage is that even though we also have a very heavy docket, it is expected that we will slow things down, that we can look at issues more critically. And so I try to make sure that I understand that difference in the tone of my opinions, in terms of recognizing that the district court judges really are doing the best that they can. So I think that there's still benefits to that, but it's not, for me right now, necessary. What is necessary is some work experience, though, either before you went to law school or after, because having that experience in a professional setting and knowing how to show up in that way is important. And then also understanding work ethic, which I talked about a little bit earlier, is also important. And so I've moved away from the, you know, that you had to have worked for a court, because there are a lot of different environments in which you can gain those qualities.
Thank you so much. Judge Whitehead, would you talk about some of the skills that you prioritize when you're selecting a clerk?
Sure. I mean, you know, I talked about intellect, being a team player, and also having some grit about you. You know, I've got a posting up on Oscar right now. I don't have any sort of bright line cutoffs from a grade or ranking standpoint, or even you know, what law school you went to. I mean, I think there are preferences. They make you check boxes when you post anything on Oscar, so that's what I did. But I can tell you, I mean, sort of, you know, qualitatively in terms of what type of clerk I'm going to get. I mean, is there a difference between top quarter of the class versus top 15% of the class? I don't know. I don't think so, based on what I've seen, especially when you frame it around those other characteristics that I spoke about. I will tell you that, you know, I was just inundated with applications this last go around. Is an embarrassment of riches. I mean, I was looking at some of these applications. I'm like, oh my gosh, all of these people are excellent. How am I ever going to choose? But what I will say is that there were, you know, sort of a category of cover letter and submission where it just seemed like people were spamming judges looking for clerkships. You know, I can appreciate that you were top 10% in law review at some excellent law school, but when your package just looks like, you know, a transmittal letter, I mean, that's really not going to move you to the top of the stack. So I would say really, you know, do a good job in putting together that cover letter, letting me know, you know, why you want to clerk for me, why you want to be here in the Western District of Washington, and what you would bring to chambers, because I really do try to take a holistic view to all of it. You know, I do value experience, but you know, there's a counterweight to everything. I mean, I worry about some of sort of the mid-career attorneys that are looking for are burnt out and looking for a way station, because we are working over here on the district court, as Judge Abudu mentioned. So, you know, I do like experience, but I've had a great experience here with the law clerk that I hired straight out of law school. And I think it's, you know, the characteristics and just, you know, sort of his temperament that have made him successful so far as a law. And I think those things would have shown through even if he had more years of experience. So, you know, for me, you know, it's really about just that holistic approach, looking at the entirety of what the person might bring to chambers, and just really trying to pick someone that's committed to pushing themselves hard to get this work right.
Thank you. Judge Westbrook, could you talk about what you prioritize? Oh, you're on mute still. There you go.
I echo what my colleagues have said. I too don't necessarily put grades at the top of the stack. I have hired law clerks who have had a 2.7, who have been the best law clerks that I've hired. I've also hired law clerks who've had, you know, 4.0. I do believe that, again, what we do, whether you're practicing in litigation or whether or not you're on the bench, all of this is a calling. Being a lawyer, being in the legal profession is a calling. And so, you know, I'll go back to what I said earlier about having a passion for it. You have to have a passion, in my view, for social justice, but you have to have a passion just as much for the law. Having a passion for the law is not for someone who's faint at heart, who gets easily discouraged, because as the judges know who are on this panel, you know, you can have a love-hate relationship with the practice of law. I mean, we've all, you know, have had successes and we've all had losses. And what you have to do is learn from those losses and help and allow it to help push you forward. And it's the same thing, you know, with being a law clerk. So I look for someone, I believe Judge said earlier, who's a team player. I also look for someone who, you know, would like what they do, because being a law clerk, just like being in litigation, will call for long hours. This is not a 9-to-5 job. It may require that you work past 5. It may require that you work on weekends. If we're preparing for oral argument, as Judge said earlier, it may require that you work on weekends and that we, you know, try to get these issues right. So when I'm on the bench for oral arguments, I know the right questions to ask, or I know exactly, you know, what to, you know, try to flesh out from the, you know, litigants. And so all of that is very, very important. You're not going to necessarily find that, you know, just because someone has a, you know, 4.0 GPA. But again, I also look at your writing samples. I want to see exactly how you're writing. And I do want to go back and clarify something that I said. I work on a court with 10 judges, and each judge has 2 law clerks. And I'm not just saying this for me. I'm saying this for the other law students who are joining us today, that you do have to put your best foot forward. Because if you're going to go work for someone and you don't care about your work product, depending on who you are and what you look like, they may look at you and attach that to a faction of people, which is not fair. I agree with that 100%. But it's always important to put your best foot forward always when you can. And I stress that to my law clerks. I just don't sit here representing Latrice Westbrooks. I sit here representing other African Americans in the state, and particularly other African American women. And I carry that with me every day I come here and I sit in this chair. So again, I look at a number of things. Now, I also, just in fairness, look to see if you want to be a part of the Federalist Society. That's someone who if you're a part of the Federalist Society, chances are you're not going to be a member of ACS. And so I do look at things, like that, to see exactly what type of path are you on, and are you willing to do anything to get where you want to be. And that type of student may not be a great fit for my chambers, because again, I don't see this as just a job. I see this as a calling, and I expect for the person I'm going to hire to see this as the same.
Thank you. Justice McKeig, what do you look for when you're selecting a clerk?
You know, it's very different from district court to where I am now. Our process is pretty formal. I think our job announcements go out in April, and there are 7 of us on the court, and we vote for our top 25, and that really varies amongst the 7 of us. But those top vote getters are the ones who actually get an interview. And then once everybody who's got an interview, I think then it just becomes sort of if you click personally, because we spend a lot of time together, and I certainly would not want it to be an unpleasant experience for the clerk or for me, because that just makes me not very fun to work with. So I want it to be something that's really workable both ways. So I am, certainly the writing is important to me at this level. And when I first came on the court, I always thought, oh, I'm not gonna require everything that my colleagues do. I'm not gonna make them make sure they got these really good grades. Of course, the dog is doing this right now. I apologize to all of you. But it is important because those who didn't have those grades really have had a struggle on the court. And so maybe if it's not a perfect fit, maybe I can hook them up with a trial court judge. But I also think that there's a question by one of your participants about being a mom and then trying to do this work. And I actually have one of my clerks right now. She is a mom of a new baby. She just had the baby before she started the clerkship. And I just told her that I would work with her because I just think that's really important. And so there are days like yesterday, she had to stay home because the daycares were closed because it was so dang cold here in Minnesota. And that's just sort of life. And I think that happens everywhere. So I think knowing a little bit about the person you're applying with, I agree for sure with Judge Whitehead. When you're just doing that trolling, we can see that. And then I don't pay a whole lot to those resumes or things that are coming across my desk. I want to know that it's something that you really thought about and that you actually want to work there. But, if you don't try, it's never going to happen. So if you have any interest in doing it, I think you just got to give it your best shot.
Thank
I
you.
wanted to add one other thing about the writing samples. I read them. I really do. I asked for 2 writing samples, one of your choice. So typically what folks consider the best thing they ever wrote. But then I also want the most recent thing you wrote, because I want to just take a look at your everyday work product, not just, the law review article that you worked on for a year. I mean, I want to see, the best thing you wrote and the most recent thing you wrote, and I read them both. And it plays a huge role in my selection process. I mean, once I get down to, the last however many folks, it's the writing sample it's really going to turn things. And that's grades are set aside at that point. I mean, I feel like, okay, you've met the baseline requirement. I want to take a look at how you write, because that's really the name of the game here in district court.
Thank you. That's great advice. So let's talk a little bit about the interview. Is there something that you think students should be doing to very well prepare themselves if they get an interview? If they get past this arduous screening process, what's next? And anyone can jump in. This is one of the questions we have in the chat.
I'll go first. I would suggest that you treat the interview, and this is because, especially during COVID, and a lot of my interviews are done by Zoom before I allow the student to come in. Treat it just like any other job interview. Do not get casual with how you're dressed. I've had one law student come in with mules on and just and again, these are very formal positions. And so I would say, first of all, again, put your best foot forward. Watch how you are dressed. And once you are allowed to meet with the judge, because in my office, the law clerks interview the applicant first, and then they'll come back and give me some feedback. And then I will either that same day or on another day, another scheduled day, I will interview the applicant. And that's a part of my screening process. And once I've had an opportunity to interview the applicant, then of course I will make the final decision as to who's going to be hired. But the first thing, and again, I know it's simple, and I know that it's probably something that would think, well, you don't have to say that, but I have to, because again, I know that in these day and times, we're not as formal as our parents may have, been, but again, it's not good to come into an interview with strappy sandals on or strappy heels or, 5-inch stilettos, or, just kind of be as toned down and as conservative as possible. Again, it's not fair, but it's still a standard out there. And you want to make sure that you don't do anything that sets you apart in a negative way.
I think it's very important to be explicit with the advice. Thank you. Does anyone else want to add to how to best prepare for an interview?
Well, I just want to acknowledge, I think to Judge Westbrook's point is that there are generational differences that are coming more to the surface, and the employment environment is one of them for sure. So my little pet peeve I will share is thank you letters or thank you notes. That was understood when I was in law school, that you just do that. And now I appreciate it more because we don't have a whole lot of time. So now when people say thank you for your time, it really means something because our time is precious. There are a lot of demands on us. So I do think that it is a nice professional just courtesy to recognize that Judge Westbrooks and Judge Whitehead and Judge McKeig, dedicated their time to listen to you, to offer advice to you. And I think at least a note of thanks is in order. And I'm surprised by the number of applicants who don't do that.
May I please just chime in, Judge Abudu? Let me just say this. Thank you for saying that, because that does make or break whether or not you are offered a clerkship or not. And I say that because that happened to me personally. More than 25 years ago, I applied for a job with the Mississippi Supreme Court, with a Mississippi Supreme Court justice. I did not, even though I was advised to, I did not send a thank you note. And I later found out that that was the edging difference between me getting the job and someone else who did. So I thank you again, because I always tell law students, please send a thank you note, because that could be the difference between you and someone else. So thank you. I had to say that. Thank you.
Judges, would you accept a thank you email?
No.
That's okay. No, okay.
No.
You got to know.
Okay,
Yes.
I'll accept the thank you email. You
No.
won't accept the thank you email?
I won't, because you said we don't have a whole lot of time. And I also, let me just say this too, I also will not accept an emailed application. I like the bonding paper. I like the time that it takes for you to, do a cover letter and, just make sure that the bonding letter is upside, right. I appreciate all of that effort. And I appreciate the time that it takes for you to write in your handwriting, just saying thank you. It's the time that it takes for you to do that. And that shows me that it means a lot for you to do that. So no, I know that, again, generational differences, that, we are moving into an electronic area. Everything is, done on your iPhone or done on the computer. But again, I love the time that it takes, because it's also something that I would do. I take the time to write thank you notes all the time. It's something I love to do. And I just think that, again, it's just showing a certain courtesy and respect when you do it. So.
Well, I will accept thank you email. Don't mail me hard copies, because that lets me know you didn't look at my application, which says do not mail me hard copies, and don't email me, frankly, do it through Oscar. But with the federal clerkships and the Oscar game, things move so quickly that if you mail me something from the East Coast to over here, I might have already offered somebody else, or maybe you interviewed with another judge and accepted with somebody else. So I will accept an email. I like it when, like Judge Westbrook, my law clerks do the first round of interviews. So I like it when people are thoughtful and email my law clerks to say thank you. We'll email each other, my law clerks and I, back and forth. Did you get a thank you? Did you get a thank you? Just to make sure that courtesy, that formality was observed. But my big thing is something that I ask of the attorneys and that I expected of myself as a practicing attorney. Listen to the question that's being asked and answer that question. You know, if you lost your train of thought or you didn't understand my question, say so. It's okay. But you know, I've put thought into my questions, and you know, speaking of, I mean, I try to ask everyone the same questions. I think it makes for a fair process. If I ask all of the applicants the same questions, it gives people an equal opportunity to shine. So there isn't much variation, you know, when I'm doing the questions. But yeah, please listen to the questions and answer that. I can tell when you don't know the question, you don't understand the question, or you're skirting around the question. It's obvious. So please listen to and answer the question.
I'll just add, I'll just add two things. One is be nice to my clerks. They're not they don't do the first interview, but they will probably walk you around the building, and my judicial assistant, because I always go back to them and say, okay, what did you think?
I'd like to add one more thing. Know your judge. Research your judge. Know who you're interviewing with. Know who you want to work for. Before you submit an application, know who it is you are actually working for.
Thank you. So when I was talking about qualifications, no one said that there's a specific ranked law school that you have to go to. Is that true?
Correct.
Okay, that's one of the questions in the chat, so I just wanted to make that explicit.
I will,
sorry, go ahead.
I will say there's no, you know, I don't care about the law school ranks. Just in being transparent and candid, one of the things that I do factor in, I don't know how much weight I give it, but you know, I'm seated here in the Western District of Washington and in Seattle. I mean, I want people that are committed to making our community a better place. So, you know, if you can demonstrate an interest in Seattle and perhaps sticking around, that is something that I look favorably upon. So that leads to the local law schools, University of Washington, Seattle U, and Gonzaga, which is on the eastern side of the state. I do look for those applications because they've got that demonstrated commitment to the community.
Thank you. That's actually another question about your thoughts for a person who might want to clerk in a jurisdiction that's different where they want to practice. Is that kind of a distinguishing factor when you're looking at applicants, or do you have any advice for someone who might be in that position?
Well, I would say, like Judge Whitehead, it has been and it is still my preference to hire individuals who want to work in the South, or at least have a connection to the South. I kind of see it like the reverse brain drain that I really want to be a part of. But I'm also acknowledging that unfortunately, we still don't have enough opportunities here in the South, and we don't have enough public interest organizations with open positions to employ everybody. So it's actually something that I'm trying to reconcile right now. That's still my preference, but I also have to take into account the reality of the work pool, and that sometimes that might be the desire, but it's not really viable.
Thank you. So for a student or an applicant who maybe feels that their grades or something about their law school experience don't actually represent their capabilities, would you suggest that they address that in the cover letter? Or is there another time that you think that they should kind of be forthcoming about that?
For me, yes. I mean, I'm a middle of the pack law student from a middle of the pack law school. So that is something that is an important part of my narrative, and a big part of how I got here, and just the experiences and the way it's all shaped me to get to this point. So yeah, I mean, I would like for people to address it. I mean, I won't kid you. Sure, we get applicants from, you know, all the top law schools, T14, you know, Harvard, Yale, Stanford, and they're at the top of their class. So yeah, I mean, that's who you're competing against. So if you were at all wondering or self-conscious about your grades or your law school, and you think it's something that needs to be addressed, please do. I appreciate, you know, just again, getting to have that holistic view of the applicants, and explaining, you know, that background, and letting me know that you still have those traits that I'm looking for, that you can still be a contributor to chambers, is important.
Justice McKeig, I think I saw you come off of mute. Did you want to add anything to that?
I have forgotten what I was going,
That's
going
okay.
to say.
Feel free to come back off if it comes
Thank you.
back to you. Do you have any advice for students that might want to do some networking with judges, or if they do a judicial clerkship and they maybe want to return to that judge for, I'm sorry, a judicial internship and maybe want to return for a clerkship? Do you have any advice about those scenarios, how they might want to handle that? Nobody?
Well, I mean, in Atlanta, for sure, we have a number, our bar associations, the Federal Bar Association is very active, as long as our local bars and our affinity bars. So I think that those continue to be easy one-stop shops to be able to meet people in the legal community. And, you know, sometimes it is who knows someone. So there are those degrees of separation that oftentimes you will have to take advantage of, especially if you haven't been a part of that world.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would agree with that because, or ACS hosted events. I mean, that's where we meet a lot of our local clerks. So other organizations like that, or even the law schools, like we are invited to go to the law schools. We do an oral argument at each one of our 3 law schools and then have lunch with students afterwards. And so we meet a lot of students there. And then there are students who stay in touch because they really want to make sure that we remember them when they apply. And it depends on the justice, but that's also, I've welcomed that for sure.
Thank you. And just a quick follow-up or circle back to the screening process. How are initial screenings done of your applications? Are certain people screened out immediately? Do the law clerks look at them first? How do you handle that? And anyone can jump in. And I know we're almost at time, so this might be our last question.
Typos in your cover letter, you know, not following directions with your application submission. I mean, those are easy ones to call out because it shows a lack of attention to detail. Some of the statutes and regs we're dealing with, the law is very detailed, very precise. And if you can't show me that in your application, it's going to get you screened out.
Will any political leanings screen a person out that are clear from either their resume or their cover letter?
Maybe. I will say that maybe. A strong maybe, yes.
Okay, well, this flew by. We are at time. I have to say thank you. I've learned so much, and I feel like I have a lot of valuable information to give to students. And a lot of this was very validating of what I already tell my students, so thank you. But I've really enjoyed getting to chat with everyone, and I hope this has been helpful for all the students that have joined us. Thank you so much.